Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Code and Create. Hope you're all safe and well. It's been a few weeks, but we're back now, back in the office today, which is exciting. I'm very excited for today's episode. You may have seen across our social that we've announced yesterday that we've partnered with Codiri.com. Codiri, if you don't know them, are an online games platform for developers. And you can see behind with the images there. We're super proud of this collaboration, and it's an absolute pleasure to introduce the platform's founder and long-term developer, Ricardo, to the stage today for Code and Create. He is joining me now, I believe. Oh, sorry, just toggled you off. There we go.
Hello.
How you doing, Ricardo?
Yeah, not too bad. Working from home. So
where's home?
Say it again.
Where is home?
London, Southeast London.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Ricardo. It's really, really cool to have you on. Obviously, we've been speaking for the last few weeks anyway, as I mentioned, with the Orbis and Codiri partnership. So really exciting. So Ricardo, for anyone that doesn't know, give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you do.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much, Joe. So yeah, I'm a software developer. As you said, I work with JavaScript and friends, React, Vue, Node, all these sort of things. And I've been working in the industry for about 18 years. And some time ago, I decided to stop my commercial activity to create Codiri, as you said. Codiri is an online platform where everybody can play with their coding skills and they can learn from zero to hero things like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But beyond the full stack, we got things like Java, Python, and we're expanding the stack, right? So we'll go through all the details in a minute. But yeah, so the idea is that at Codiri.com, everybody can learn coding for free. The platform is available on desktop and mobile devices, Android, iPhones, all these sort of things. And we have a special focus on helping underprivileged and underrepresented communities with their coding skills. So if anybody out there requires some coding help, we'll be more than happy to support them.
Yeah, fantastic. It's a really, really cool platform. And yeah, like you mentioned, we'll speak a bit more about that later on. But for now, in terms of the session today, Ricardo, obviously going to be focusing on playing with JavaScript data structures. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what we're going to be doing today?
Yeah, of course. So we're going to start playing some games using the Codiri platform. We'll start from the basics. So I would like to play a bit with strings, with objects. So we'll solve a few exercises in that area, in that scope. Later on, we'll move to a bit more complicated exercises, talking about things like arrays and math operations. And eventually, the last minutes, we'll deal with a more complex exercise about how to deal with nested data structure, recursion, and all these sort of things.
Okay, cool. So we'll start off beginner, slowly going up and finishing with some advanced stuff. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Cool, sounds good. So yeah, let's get right into it, Ricardo. Let's get started. And then I'm happy for you to run with it now, and you can share your screen if you like.
Of course, yeah.
Just before, actually, Ricardo, I forgot to mention for everyone who's watching, we've got a poll actually down at the bottom. I don't know if anyone's noticed it. We've had about 8 votes already. Most people haven't used the Codiri.com platform, so this is your chance now to go and use it. We've told you about it. So yeah, go and check it out, guys. It's awesome. And as you'll see over the next hour, it'll be really good. Any questions as well you've got for Ricardo? If you're watching on Crowdcast, then use the Ask a Question tab at the bottom, or put it in the chat bar on the side, and we'll get round to those questions as soon as possible. If you're watching on LinkedIn live, hit your questions in the comments, and we'll try and get round to those as well. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Ricardo, but yeah, carry on.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. So I'm now sharing the screen. Could you please confirm, Joe, that you can see my window?
Yeah, all good.
Cool, fantastic. So what you can see is the Codery platform. So this is the homepage where you can essentially filter the games that you want to play. So on the left-hand side, you got a panel with different technologies, languages, frameworks, all these sort of things, right? Then you can choose between different difficulty levels. So even if it's your very first time dealing with coding, that's fine. You pick the first level, which is lower beginner, 1 star, and you'll find out that it's very easy to start, building your tech skills.
So if you haven't had any sort of prior training or anything like that, that lower beginner one is quite user friendly, is it?
Yes, the lower beginner, I can actually show it to you in a second. So the lower beginner essentially you represents a scenario where you don't even need to do any coding. So we present you some algorithms with some gaps, and you need to just choose the right answer, right? Like a quiz game. So right. It's less intimidating, because even if you know nothing about coding, it's just about following a bunch of common sense rules, right?
Yeah. So it's like multiple choice.
It is multiple choice. I mean, let's play one question on multiple choice, just for demo purposes. So we select, for instance, JavaScript, because that's the topic of the day, of course, and then lower beginner. So then on the right-hand side, you have a list of available topics. Yeah. So when talking about coding, we got functions, we got conditionals, and of course we got data structures, which is the topic of the day. So I don't know, just as an example, let me select one of the topics. This is just for demo purposes. So for instance, math operations. Once you click on it, what you will get is something like that. So as you can see, on the left-hand side, I'm going to zoom it in a bit for readability purposes. On the left-hand side, we present you a problem. So for each topic, you are going to face 5 questions. So we present you the description of the problem. In some cases, we show you some videos that will help you to deal with the issue, and then some examples about what the problem is. So in this particular use case scenario, we are inviting you to create a function called round. So whenever we call the function round with an argument, which is a number, your algorithm should round that number, right? So for instance, if the facilitated number is 7.4, the result of rounding 7.4 is number 7, right? If the number is minus 4.1, the result of rounding it is minus 4, right? So that's the definition of the problem. On the right-hand side, as I said before, you get the algorithm partially written. So there are, even if you're not familiar with JavaScript, even if you struggle with things like curly braces, semicolons, that's fine, because the exercise is halfway through. So what we give you is the problem partially solved, and then there is a gap. You see, there is a placeholder here.
Yeah.
So now the point is, we need to just choose the right answer. So I don't know, Joe. Do you want to try?
Is it round?
Round, option A, right? So they mark it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's have a look. No, I don't think that's quite correct. You see, if we pick the wrong option, then the left-hand side becomes reddish. That means like, that's not correct.
Yeah.
But of course, we can change our mind. You were really close, Joe, because in reality, the method is math.round. That's the correct way. Yeah.
I was an R in between those two. It's a 50-50 for me, and I got it wrong.
All right, fair enough. Let's take that. And then you see, you get confetti time. That means that the answer is right? So once you manage to solve the problem, you can submit it, and then that implies that you move to question number 2 out of 5. So that's pretty much the idea. 5 questions. You need to do your best to solve them all. Of course, if any of the questions is particularly complicated, you don't feel very comfortable, you can skip it. Actually, this is what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to skip the next questions. You can review them at the end. And let me show you what happens at the end of the exercise. So once you submit that module, you are going to get a score. So that the score is the way we evaluate your talent somehow, your ability to deal with this particular topic, with this particular module. So considering that many of the attendees today, it's the first time they play with Codery. Let me do a quick round about the metrics that we are checking here. So first of all, we got tenacity. That means how many questions you've completed out of 5. Accuracy, that means how many times you thought you were right, however you failed, right? This is what, when we see players getting a very, very, very low score on the accuracy, that's what we say that they play in Street Fighter mode, right? If you are probably about 30, you'll remember Street Fighter, right? When you just hit the buttons randomly to defeat your rival without any criteria. So yeah, that's the accuracy. Then we got the speed, which is crystal clear. How long it took you to complete the challenge. Focus, how many times you went to Google or to Stack Overflow to get some extra help. And last but not least, elegance. So elegance represents how standard your code is according to some guidelines. I will talk about that later on a bit more, about different types of standards with JavaScript. So anyway, that's pretty much the way the platform works. On top of the individual training, which is the main focus of the session, you can play coding challenges. We are not going to do that today, but in a future session, we'll run coding challenges. And this activity is very fun because developers, they play against each other individually or by teams. And of course, if you are a data-driven person, you can check the leaderboards, who is first, who is second, best player of the day, best player of the week, best player by country, heat maps. So we manage lots of analytics about the platform to make it fun, right? At the end, we believe that the healthy competition aspect is very positive towards motivating our developers to practice, to play, and to develop their skills.
So just out of interest, Ricardo, who's top of the country leaderboard?
So you can find here all the statistics, right? So you can see that, for instance, so these are the statistics from the UK, but you can find data from other countries. Actually, there is something quite interesting here. You can find, top countries. So you see the UK at the moment is top 1 of the day.
Of the day.
Top 2 of the week. So, UK-based developers, there is an opportunity to, overtake the US.
That's really cool. I mean, I guess is the main member base at the moment, is it based in the UK?
It is, yes. Yeah. It is. But the thing is, we're obviously expanding to other countries. We've run some international coding events across different countries, and they are catching up, right? So I think this is quite fun, I believe.
Yeah.
Anything else, Joe, or should I just start with the action?
We've actually got a question coming in. It was something I was going to mention, actually, because this is open source, isn't it? So anyone can come in and sort of contribute to making these games and questions.
That's correct.
And Ben's asked if he's mentioned that Codery, it's ACE, which is a good thing. He's asked if there's any plans to include Kotlin into.
That's a really good question, actually. It's a really good question. So you said something absolutely right. So Codery is an open platform, and that means that everybody can contribute by creating new games. Actually, some of the games we're going to play today have been created by some of the collaborators we got all around the world. So myself, I'm a full stack developer, and I believe I have some good understanding about JavaScript and friends. But for instance, I'm not a Java developer. I'm not a Python developer. However, we collaborate with people who are experts in this language and technologies. Yeah, so of course, actually everybody can contribute. You will find out on the left-hand side something called exercises list, where you can create your own questions and everything. And if you are keen to collaborate, if you want to help, let us know, because we'll be more than happy to support you. Don't forget that one of the goals of the platform is to help and privilege and underrepresented communities, as I said before. So if you contribute to Codery by creating new games, so all these communities will benefit from that action, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. Ben, I'll put you in touch with Ricardo, and you can start building out the Kotlin presence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Ben wants to help out with Kotlin, we'll be more than happy to work together, because that's definitely something absolutely important and trendy, and of course we'd love to play Kotlin challenges one day, right?
Yeah, cool. Okay, cool.
All right. So unless you got any other questions, Joe, I think I'm gonna start.
Yeah, no, carry on.
Okay, fantastic. So as we said before, let's start with something easy. I mean, I'm not going to do the lower beginner level, but because I want to do a bit of coding, but still quite beginner. So first of all, I would like to talk about strings, which is arguably, the most fundamental topic in JavaScript. Talking about text messages, hello world, all these sort of things. So let me select JavaScript upper beginner strings, and then let's see what we get here. So on the very first question, we got a problem. So we have to create a method in JavaScript with the name getWelcomeMessage. So whenever we call the message, let me zoom it in a bit. Here you go. Whenever we call the getWelcomeMessage, we should return welcome to JavaScript. On the right-hand side, we need to, bring our magic. So the function has been partially created. We can see the signature. That gives us a feeling about how JavaScript works because you got some keywords, the keyword function, the name of the function, some parentheses. We'll see in a minute what that means, some curly braces. So if it's your very first time with JavaScript, I will give you an idea about how to create, algorithms, right? Okay, so what we need to know is that in JavaScript, when you call a function, if you want the function to bring something back, we need to type the return keyword. And now we have to present the expectation. So what's the expectation? We are expected to type a string, which is welcome to JavaScript. All right, so let me try to type something like that. Now, I would like to see if anyone has any feelings about whether this is gonna work or not.
I feel like I can't answer because of my poor performance on the first question. So yeah, guys, get involved in the chat bar if you think if we've got any questions or any answers to that.
Yeah. So there are a couple of problems here. Let me spoil one of them. So the first one, and that's arguably the most obvious one, is if you pay attention to details, the expected message is welcome to JavaScript exclamation mark at the end, right? So that was missing. Of course, as soon as one character is wrong, the whole thing is going to fail, right? That's the way it works. And now the second problem, and I'm sure someone has spotted it already, is look at the casing. So welcome to JavaScript, and this is written in capital S. Yeah. So JavaScript, as many other languages, is case sensitive. So if I test it, that's not gonna work. It's very subtle but important. Yeah, JavaScript is case sensitive, so we should make sure that we match the case. A bit off topic. When I started to code many years ago, JavaScript was written with a small s, but someone, I don't know why, decided to change to big S, right? Right, before I feel very old, let's leave it there, let's test it, and then here you go. You see that now the code is actually working. So if there are any questions, Joe?
At the moment, no. We've got no, not at the moment.
Okay. Let me bring something then. Here, as you can see, I'm using single quotes. What happens if I change single with double quotes?
I see. Yeah.
What do you think, Joe? Is that gonna work or not?
I think it'd work. Yeah.
All right. Nice. You're right. It works.
Yes, I'm getting the confetti for once. That's good.
Exactly. Brilliant. Good accuracy, Joe.
So yes, is there a preferred option then between using double and single quotes?
That's a really good question. Joe. Even though technically speaking, we could use either one or the other, and I could even be one step beyond and use something called backticks. Yeah, this is a new thing. Well, new. It's like 5 years old. It's not new anymore, but it's a relatively new thing in JavaScript using backticks. If I do that, still works, right? So technically speaking, we can solve the problem using three different approaches. However, yes, there is a preferred option. The preferred option is considered, generally speaking, single quotes. And now you may be thinking, but why is that the preferred option? Is it because I think so? Is it because you think so? None of that. This is because there are some companies and some organizations trying to standardize the way we deal with JavaScript. And that's important. Why? Because if I'm using single quotes, you are using double quotes, someone else is using backticks. At the end of the day, even though we're speaking the same language, but we are dealing with different accents. When talking about human communications, dealing with accents is good, it's nice, it's even sexy. However, when talking about coding, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. We should try to speak the same language, of course, and the same accent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question is, who decides what's the right accent? Yeah. Who decides that? Again, there are different organizations. One of the most popular ones, and I know this could be surprising for many new developers, but that's true. So one of the most important standards about styling in JavaScript is written by Airbnb. So if you search on Google Airbnb JavaScript, you will land on a very long web page, which is a GitHub repo actually, where Airbnb suggests how JavaScript should be written. So they got style guides for different languages and libraries, including React and all these sort of things. But towards the scope of this session, something you'll find out is that they, in the table of contents, they talk about the strings. And the first thing they said is use single quotes for strings. And then, look, this is really good because they present you some examples. So bad, double quotes, bad, backticks, good, single quotes, right? And in some occasions, and that's one of the things I love about this style guide, they try to argue, they try to explain why, under their point of view, something is considered good or bad. Yeah. So yeah, that doesn't mean that you have to follow Airbnb style guide end to end. That depends on the company, and there are obviously exceptions. But it's good to have this sort of rules in the background, right? Trying to merge our coding styles. Anything else, Joe?
No, for now. Mohammed on the side has put, is this platform going to be free, and when can we expect tutorials on this platform?
No, the platform is free. Talking about tutorials, we have tutorials already. So you'll find out there is something called video tutorials. And here you are going to find out tutorials about many different aspects. So for instance, Codeflix, that's the result of combining Codery and Netflix. So here you learn how to create professional grade apps from scratch using a modern stack, JavaScript, React, HTML, CSS, also backend, Node.js, MongoDB. Yeah. So you'll find lots of tutorials here. Then you will find some of the meetup events we've celebrated in the past, some nice workshops we have recorded, some coding recipes where you can find me with a whiteboard, writing some lines and talking about coding, speaking. So yeah, we got plenty of video tutorials already. And of course, if anyone has any suggestion about, why don't you talk about this or about that, this is an open platform, so feel free to let us know your thoughts.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Joe. So let's do at least one more question on the JavaScript strings beginner.
So yep. I was going to say, so should the variable names reflect the type of data that they hold? Should they talk about the sort of semantics of the problem that you're trying to solve, I guess?
That's a really good question. So look, so for instance, in this occasion, look, we got a function called getWelcomeName. The function receives an argument. You see, so the argument, that's the way we can customize the behavior of our function. Mm-hmm. So the argument is the input, and eventually the function will return an output, whatever we want, right? So we can type Brexit if you want. Probably that's not the best example, but you get the point, right? You can return whatever you want. So the question is, here we call the argument username. But technically speaking, can I type here, I don't know, hello? Or can I type door? Or can I type, Thames, whatever, yeah? So the answer is yes, you can type here whatever you want. But the point is, first of all, let's solve the problem. And once the problem is solved, we'll see the impact of dealing with the wrong semantics? So I'll be back to that question in a minute. For now, let's keep it as it is, username. And now let's see how to combine strings like hello with variables, Peter, Martha, or Andrew, right? So the way you can do that in JavaScript is, first of all, historically speaking, you can do something like that. Hello, and then using the plus operator, you can just type the variable name, yeah? Hello space plus username. So if we do that, you see the code works. Starting from 2015, there is a probably better way of combining string literals with variables. And this is by using string interpolation and backticks. You remember I briefly talked about backticks before.
Yeah.
So with backticks, look, I'm gonna leave that here just for reference purposes, and I'm gonna refactor that line. So return backticks, and now hello space dollar curly brace and close curly brace, right? So then we type username. So line number 2 is equivalent to line number 3. And the more complex the expression you are dealing with is, the more convenient that syntax is, because you save the mess, you avoid the mess of dealing with plus, spaces, I don't know. It feels a bit more natural, personally speaking. Yeah. So if I test that piece of code, you see it works fine. And now back to your question, Joe. So technically speaking, I can rename username with a car. If I run this piece of code, it works. But as you are already thinking, from a semantics point of view, this is horrible, because car has nothing to do with the semantics of the exercise.
Yeah.
So even though it's correct, technically speaking, it works, you are making things way more complicated to your colleagues, because if I come across that piece of code and I find a function called get welcome message and I see the argument is car, I will imagine we're talking about vehicles, right? However, that's not the case. We're talking about humans, about person, no? So it's very important to work well on the semantics. I know some people, they like to keep it generic, something like that. That's correct, because at the end of the day, Peter is a string, Martha is a string, Andrew is a string. But if we do that, we are missing the opportunity of improving the semantics. A string tells me the type of data I'm dealing with, fantastic. But I believe there is much more value by renaming it to something meaningful. I don't know. You can call it username, you can call it name, person name, I don't care, right? But at least let's try to make things easier for our colleagues. Many people believe that coding it's difficult, and probably it is. But if writing code is difficult, reading others' code can be even more challenging, because everyone has different approach towards coding, and that could be definitely challenging in the long term. And that's
it. Makes sense. Yeah, no, it makes sense completely. So I guess it's, although it can work the other way, it's just easier and helpful to others to make sure that it's matches what your actual strings are.
Definitely. I completely agree with you, Joe. All right, I think we there's quite a lot of time on the strings topic. Should we change to something different? Should we do a bit of objects, Joe?
Yeah, sounds good.
Fantastic. So I'm going to leave it there. Back to the landing page, and I will select JavaScript, upper beginner, and in this occasion, I'm going to find objects. Here we go. All right, so objects. What is an object? An object is a slightly more complicated data structure in JavaScript, where, to simplify things a bit, an object is a collection of key value pairs. Yeah, so you can think an object is like a dictionary where you got a key, so first name, and you got the value associated to the key, Peter. You got another key, last name, and the value associated to that key, Luis, right? So the object is determined by these curly braces. You see, JavaScript uses curly braces for too many things, and that's a bit confusing sometimes. But in this scope, you see I'm highlighting the object. So the get first name function receives an argument, a single argument, which is an object. So then we can map it here. Can you give me, Joe, a good argument name to represent that object?
A good argument name?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you 3 options. Football team, or city, or user.
User.
You see? That's crystal clear, right?
Yeah.
Because we are talking about, I don't know, people. I don't know if user is better than person. I don't know. But, at least it's better than football team for sure, right?
Yeah.
All right. So how we work with objects. So that function receives an object with first and last name and is expected to return the first name, Peter. So the way we solve the problem is by referring to the object, user, and then, that's very important, with dot notation, we declare the property that we want to deal with. In this particular case, we want to get the first name of the user, so we'll type user.firstName. That's the way we can point to the first name of the user. That's not going to work, however. This is a classic mistake when coding by the first time in languages like JavaScript. Imagine that I believe that piece of code is absolutely brilliant. However, look at what happened if I test it. The problem is telling us you didn't return anything. And the reason is, guys, remember that if you want to bring something back to whoever called the function, you should type the return keyword in front of the expression you wanna return, right? That's pretty obvious, but it's easy to forget.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. Any questions? Anything else, Joe?
Not from me at the moment.
Okay.
Again, guys, if you've got any questions for Ricardo as we're going along, get them in the chat bar. We'll get around to them. But carry on, Ricardo, and I'll let you know as and when they come in. Yeah.
Exactly. Feel free to interrupt me at any time, Joe. Thank you very much.
Will do.
All right. Question number 2. Things get a bit more spicy here. Yeah.
So we're stepping it up a little notch here, a bit intermediate level now.
We're still on beginner.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So we're still objects beginner. So I'll do 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll jump straight to intermediate level.
Okay, cool.
So here the problem is very similar. Get first name, again, Peter, right? So that's the same thing. The issue is the structure of the object. It's a bit more complicated because what we got here is a multi-level object. We got our argument. That's the object, as you can see on the left-hand side of my screen. However, the name property of the object is another object. Yeah, and that's an absolutely valid structure in JavaScript. Imagine that you want to save your, personal details. So at some point, you may have something like that. So you will have something called user, and then you may have something called address. And as part of the address, you can have something like line 1 with, the number, and then line 2, whatever. Yeah? That's an absolutely valid structure in JavaScript, and that helps a lot towards keeping your information organized. Yeah, the way we will access to, for instance, the line 1 of the user's address will be by typing user.address.line1, and that will return string 34. So that's pretty much what we need to do here. So here we are going to return user.name.first. Let's see what happens if we test that snippet. As many of you already realized, that's not going to work. And the reason why this is not going to work, if we pay attention to the console at the bottom, it's throwing an error. User is not defined. And the reason is user is the data that gets provided to the function. However, we forgot to bind it here in the parentheses. Yeah. So these are the classic mistakes that we used to do when we start coding with JavaScript. Yeah. Get first name, then the argument name, and then return whatever we want to return. All right, I got a question for you, Joe. What happens if I rename user with object here and there? Do you think this is going to work or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joe. It's going to work because, as we said before, we can type whatever we want here. But I guess you don't really agree much, right, about these semantics, because object, it's not very meaningful, right? It's not meaningful enough, right? So let's call it something like that, user. Question for me, Joe?
Not at the moment, Ricardo. I think, yeah, all good.
All right, fantastic. Question number 3. Oh, I love this one. That's a bit more complicated, and many people struggle with this one, which is great, right? Because then we can see how to deal with it all together. So exactly. we said before that in JavaScript you can access any properties of the object by using the dot notation. So let me bring the example back. I mean, I got a user and I got an address. And then I want to get the first line 1, whatever, and then line 2, got something like that. So if eventually you're going to get the line 2 of the address, you will type user dot address dot line 2, and that will return whatever the address is, right? That's fine. That's fine. So I could create a function. If I wanted, function get user address line 2, for instance, yeah? If I wanted, I could create that, and that function will receive the user, and it will return user.address.line 2. And that's fine. That's absolutely correct. What if I want to get the first line of the user address? Well, similarly, I can create another function, get user address line 1, and as part of this function, I can actually do something like that. Yeah, and that's absolutely fine. The only thing I need to do is to change user address to line 1. Yeah, but the problem here is if we got many properties, are we going to create one function for each property? This could be a bit too much, right? So in JavaScript, there is a different way to make your functions more dynamic. So in JavaScript, rather than using the dot notation, we can do something like that. We can use a square bracket notation, which is a different thing in JavaScript. And then we can do something like passing the property name, like, for instance, line 1 or line 2 or phone number, whatever. Yeah, you can pass properties using the square bracket notation. Why this is relevant? Because then we can create a variable. So let me create a variable called the property we want to access. So for instance, line 2. And finally, we can do something like that. Yeah? So the point is that I don't need 2 functions, get user address line 1 and get user address line 2. So I can create a single function called get user address line. And then I can pass the property I want to access. So then the way I will call that is by typing get user address line 1, user line 1, and that will return the number. Or alternatively, if I want to get the street name, I will call the same function with line 2. And then your code gets a bit more simple, yeah? Because I don't need to create as many functions as properties I want to deal with. So in that respect, we need to do something very similar. We got the first argument, which is the user, and then we got the property we want to access. So the only thing we need to do is to return user, and then with a square bracket, taking the property that we want to return. Yeah, I know that's a bit mind-blowing, especially as you got used to the dot notation, but that gives you a lot of flexibility towards dealing with different properties of an object in a very simplistic fashion. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely slightly, you lost me slightly more there than the few questions before, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it just looks as though it's, quite simple to get your head around in this platform, if you like.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. Yeah, so that's pretty much it about objects. So let's continue increasing the difficulty of this session by doing a bit more advanced. So let's talk about arrays. So what an array is. So an array is just a collection, a sequential collection of elements. So for instance, imagine that I have 3 cars, so I could create a variable called cars, and then the name of the cars, right? Or the brands, the makes, or whatever. Yeah. So that collection is an array, and as you can see, it's represented by square brackets. If you remember before, we show how to deal with objects, and objects got represented by curly braces or curly brackets. However, arrays are represented by square brackets. Yeah. All right. So that question, this is a bit tricky, actually. That's probably not the first question to start dealing with arrays, but that's intermediate, right? So we are dealing with more complex challenges over time. So we want to create some sort of utility component where we want to add elements to existing arrays. Yeah. People, cars, animals, computer brands, I don't care. Yeah, we want to be able to interact with our list of elements by appending, prepending, for instance, deleting the first element of the list and deleting the last element of the list. So first of all, append. So the first argument is going to be the name of the argument. So here it looks like we're talking about people. So let me call it people in plural, yeah, or representing, something that could hold more than one element. And eventually, for instance, the person that we want to add to the array. Yeah, remember, append means I want to add that person at the end of the list, as you can see here. So technically speaking, some of you may be thinking about using something called push, and that's probably completely okay. So something we could do is running people.push and then the name of the person. And then eventually, let's return the people once we push the person into it. Push is the same as append. Yeah, push is the technical way of appending elements to the array. How do we prepend? Well, very similar concept. However, instead of push, in this occasion, we are going to use something called unshift. So unshift will prepend that person to the beginning of the array, and then we will return it. And now, how do we delete the first element in an array of people? So the way, look, if we prepend using unshift, the way we delete the first one is by using shift. I mean, these are just JavaScript array utility methods, and we need to get used to them. I'll talk about that in a minute a bit more. Before, let me just show how to delete the last element of an array. So the way we get rid of the last one is by using pop. Sophisticated data structures in JavaScript. And that hasn't been like that since the beginning. JavaScript was first introduced in 1995. However, until 2010, it was a bit difficult to deal with arrays. The APIs offered by JavaScript were very simplistic. We needed things like load_as or underscore. We needed external tools to deal with arrays efficiently. However, starting from 2011 and particularly 2015, every new version of JavaScript has increased the power, has added new methods, new utilities to simplify the process of dealing with JavaScript, to the point that you will see that when dealing with more complicated data structures, you will tend to transform everything into arrays because it will be much easier to transform, operate, move, and all these sort of things. Yeah. So let's see if that works. I think we are gonna struggle a bit here. Let's see why. Look, if I test it, it's almost perfect. However, one of the expectations, one of the assertions is not working. And this is about the first method we created, append. Why this is not working? Because in this occasion, we are trying to append something different. Yeah, and on top, we are trying to append a string. We've talked about the strings already. However, in this occasion, we are trying to append an array into another array, which is okay in JavaScript, that the structure of nested arrays is completely valid. However, in regards of this exercise, that's not what the algorithm wants us to do. So apparently what the algorithm wants us to do is, if we are trying to append a string, then fantastic, do it. Yes, push it at the end of the array. However, if we are trying to append an array, ignore it. So there are a couple of ways we can solve the problem. One of them is by checking the type of person. So how do we check the type of person? We can type of person equal string. Yeah? So if the person is a string and nothing else, then add it to the array. Yeah? That's a way to solve the problem somehow. Actually, let's test it. And actually, you see, it works. Joe, unless there is any question on the chat.
Not at the moment. Well,
okay.
We've got a few questions coming in that we have had one in from Jasvir actually. He's asked, how can we append and delete a particular position?
That's a really good question. And I think it's unfortunate that we're going to run out of time because that question is very important. But if you want to append to a particular position, the best way to do it is by using a highly controversial yet powerful method called splice. Don't confuse splice with a slice. So one thing is a splice, yes, and the other thing is a slice. So with a splice, we can pass multiple arguments. So first of all, we pass the index. The index, let's present an example. In many words, we got a list of people, which is Joe, Ricardo. That's it, right? We've got a list of people. Imagine that we want to add someone in between. We want to add Mary, for instance, in between of Joe and Ricardo. So the way you will do it is by using people.splice. First of all, the index where you want to deal with. So the index will be 1, because in JavaScript, we start at index number 0. So Joe will be index 0. Ricardo will be index 1. But because we want to add Mary in between of Joe and Ricardo, we want to attack index number 1. The second element is going to be, how many elements do you want to remove? You see, that's why this is a bit confusing. That is the way it works. So we don't want to remove any elements. We want to keep Joe and Ricardo. However, the third element represents how many or which element or elements do you want to add to the array. So in this occasion, you can do something like that. So by running people.splice 1, 0, and Mary, what we'll get back eventually is Joe, Mary, and Ricardo. Yeah. And the beautifulness about the splice, once you got used to it, is that you can add multiple elements in that index. So Mary and Carolina, for instance, that will add Joe, Mary, Carolina, and Ricardo. And actually, if I instead of 0 put 1, it will remove element at index 1. That was me. So that will essentially keep an array with Joe, Mary, and Carolina. Yeah. So splice is very powerful, but be careful with it because it's a bit, it takes a bit of time to get used to this API. So for instance, splice returns the number of elements that the array has removed. That's a bit controversial. This is a classic example of all JavaScript. I mean, today there are millions of JavaScript developers. The standard ECMAScript standard is community driven. So there are so many people looking after the standard that the APIs are beautiful. But in the past, some of these APIs were a bit, I don't know, strange. Yeah, trying to be polite. Anyway, I got a question for the audience. Something to keep in mind. If you were presenting that piece of code to, for instance, as part of a job interview, if you were applying to a mid-level to senior sort of, if you were applying to medium to senior position role, I'm afraid you won't get it. They will complain about the approach. Yeah. I'm not gonna say why. There is something fundamentally wrong. I mean, I'll tell you something. It works. We got confetti, blah blah blah, but there is something wrong here, and I don't want to explain what. I'll leave the question open, and of course, feel free to participate here on Meetup or LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to have a chat with you about your thoughts. Yeah. Anything else, Joe?
No, I think that's it at the moment.
All right, so I think we've got 10 minutes left. So I'm gonna give you the option to decide what do you want me to do. So I'm gonna give you two options. Continue with this level of difficulty, talking about numbers, math operations, blah, blah, or, going a bit crazy and doing something really complicated. What do you want me to do?
Oh, good question. Let's stick on the intermediate stuff, and it'll give us an opportunity to do another one of these at more advanced level. Oh, okay. Ben's gone complicated. Do you know what? Let's go complicated.
All right, let's go complicated.
Let's do it. Why not?
Fantastic. 10 minutes, guys. All right, so I'm going to do a bit of JavaScript upper advanced, and I'm going to do recursion. Recursion is one of the things. Recursion to me is like being pregnant. Either you are pregnant or you are not pregnant. You cannot be half pregnant.
That's a great analogy. I like that.
So to me, the first time you deal with complex algorithms, recursion could be really complicated, much more complicated than any other topic. But at some point, once you get used to how recursion works, it becomes super easy. Yeah. So let's see what recursion is. So in this occasion, look, the problem itself is a piece of cake. Understanding from a human point of view, what the hell are we trying to do here is super simplistic. We receive an object. We've talked about objects already. Yeah. And what we want to do is we want to add all the numbers available as part of that object, right? So how many numbers we got here? We got number 1, -2, 4, and 3. So the result of adding 1 plus -2 plus 4 plus 3 is 6. Yeah. So you may be thinking, all right, but that's pretty simple, right? It is. From a human point of view, it is very simple. But solving this problem from a mathematical point of view has some challenges. And it could be complicated, really complicated, depending on the structure of your data. So here you see we got an object that has another sub-object. And this sub-object, look at the second use case scenario, the second sub-object has another sub-object. So we can have a multi-level object, and it could be hard to evaluate, hard to parse. And this is why recursion can help us a lot. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to solve the problem, and I'm going to present the flow that my code will follow in a visual-friendly way. That's at least my plan. So, first of all, I cannot talk about people, cars, or football teams here because this seems very, I don't know, domain agnostic. So I'm going to call it just object because I have no idea about what are we talking about here. And now, look, I'm going to do something. I'm going to use something called object, mind the big O, dot values. And that will return, let me actually add some annotations on the right-hand side to show what I'm doing on each step. So object will return an array, always return an array, with the values associated to all the keys. So if we focus on the first use case scenario, this array will have 3 values. First of all, number 1. The second value will be an object, and the third value will be number 3. Yep. So 3 elements at the end of the day, 2 numbers and 1 object in between. All right, and once we got that, I'm going to use a super powerful method called reduce. So reduce is very convenient when you need to loop over your array. Definitely we want to iterate, right? We're going to go from the beginning to the end, and you want to keep some state. You want to pass some data from one iteration to the other. This is going to be, if you've never used reduce, if you never use recursion, this is going to sound like Chinese, but don't worry, I'll try to explain it later on. So with reduce, we can facilitate different arguments. So for instance, the first one, this is what we call the accumulator. That's a technical description you will find on MDN and other external resources. I'll talk a little bit more about whether I like this or not, but for now, for educational purposes, let's leave it like that. Then we got each individual element of the array. So I'm going to call it value. And then we can pass other arguments, but I'm going to keep it simple. So unless we need them, I'm going to leave the others as they are. Then something very important is the accumulator will be the state that will be passed from iteration I to iteration I plus 1. So we have to initialize it. We have to provide a default value. How are we going to do that? By passing a second argument to the reduce function with the default value of the accumulator. So now, in reality, we want to do something like that. We want to return what we return on one iteration will be the accumulator on the next one. As I said before, I'll explain that in a more visual way in a minute. But for now, we want to keep incrementing the counter, right? So first of all, we got 1, and then we want to add -2, and then we want to add 4, and then we're going to add 3. So we want to fill the basket. You know, when you go to Tesco, to Sainsbury's, you fill the basket with your groceries. So that's pretty much the same principle. The accumulator is the basket we are filling iteration after iteration. All right. So I could do something like that. But that's not going to work. Let me show you why this is not going to work, and let me present you my matrix. So on the first iteration, the value of the accumulator is going to be 0 because that's the default. The value is going to be 1 because that's the first value. That's okay. That's fine. However, the main problem here is going to be that we're going to return 0 plus 1. That's still okay. Sorry. But now on iteration number 2, the accumulator is what we return on the previous iterations. The accumulator is 1. But now, here is the problem, guys. The value, the second value, is an object with this data, C minus 2, D4. So here, we are trying to do 1 plus this thing. That doesn't make any sense. That will return probably something called not a number, right? Because how can we process this basic mathematical operation? We cannot. Unfortunately, JavaScript doesn't know. You can do 1 plus 2 or 1 plus minus 4, but not 1 plus object, blah, blah. That doesn't make any sense. So we need some pre-processing. So what's going to be the pre-processing? The pre-processing here is going to be, we need to create a variable. Let me call it, for instance, current value. And then we need to check the type of the value. So we briefly talked about how to use type of before. So if the type of value is number, look, I'm typing what we call a ternary operator. So this is the condition. If the value is a number, then yes, I want to add it. Else, if it's an object, we're assuming that if it's not a number, it's an object. Then look, that's the complex part. We need to call recursively. We need to call the same function, calculate total. But in this occasion, I'm going to pass the value because I would like to calculate the total associated to this sub-object. So let's do something. Let's continue running or representing this problem. I'm going to add a new row on top, which is going to be the dimension. And on the dimension, I'm going to say whether I'm on the root level or I'm on a nested level, like Inception, if you remember the movie. So what happened now? What happened now? So the value is an object. So what do we return? We don't know yet. We don't know because we got an object. Because the type of the value is not a number, it's an object. What we need to do is we need to change the dimension. We need to go deeper. So we start again. We call calculate total again. And in this occasion, the accumulator is going to be 0 because we start over. And because now this is our entry point, the first value is going to be minus 2. And then that's going to return 0 plus minus 2, which is minus 2. So then we continue iterating. Dimension 2, iteration 2. Now the accumulator is minus 2. The value is 4. So here, this is going to return minus 2 plus 4, which is 2. What happened on dimension 2, iteration 3? Nothing, because that object only has 2 values. So that means that the second iteration is over. And that means that the result of the end of the iteration 2, which is number 2 out of coincidence, will be the current value. So that expression will be replaced by number 2. And because now we are playing with numbers, we can easily identify the result of adding 1 and 2, which is going to be 3. Yeah? So finally, the only thing we need to do is back to dimension 1. Now we're on iteration number 3. The accumulator was 3. Here you go. So accumulator is 3. The final value is 3 out of coincidence again. Here you got it on top. So the final result is going to be 3. That was the previous total plus the new value, which is 3 again. So 3 plus 3 is obviously 6. Yeah. So unless we did something wrong, if we evaluate that, right, of course, I forgot. So I created a variable, as you can see here, but I completely forgot to add it here at the end. Yeah. So that was a silly mistake. And you see that once I fix it, it works. And it works regardless of how complex our object is. Yeah? I'm not 100% happy about that, but I think we are out of time, so I'm not going to continue explaining how to improve that. But that's some sort of homework, guys. How can you improve this algorithm? How can you simplify it a little bit? Yeah? And from my side, Joe, unless there are any questions, that's pretty much all I wanted to present today.
Yeah, cool. Really appreciate that, Ricardo. I think we could have gone on all afternoon then, to be honest. But yeah, we've got to keep it to the hour. So really appreciate you getting involved. I'd just like to add, obviously, following on from our partnership I mentioned earlier with Coderi, on the 26th of September. Is that right?
I think it's the 23rd Wednesday.
23rd, yes, Wednesday the 23rd of September. We're hosting a meetup where everyone can get involved. So it's going to be JavaScript challenge based. You can come in, join us remotely, and play along with Ricardo and many other people. So keep an eye out on our socials, on my LinkedIn, Orbis LinkedIn, on the meetup page. It will be everywhere, and it'll be really, really excited for that. It's going to be really cool. So yeah, keep an eye out. Again, Ricardo, thank you very much for joining us. Really
thank you for having me today.
No worries at all. Thanks for coming, guys, and we'll see you soon.